All right, before we dive in, here's a quick note. These are the first 3 modules, the first 3 classes from my full course titled Patternmaking in Fashion Design Part 2. These are intermediate level skills focused on yokes and yoke variations and stripes, the kind of techniques that really shape your growth as a fashion designer. So, let's get started. Hello everyone and welcome to Fashion Designing Intermediate course. My name is Nino Villa and I'm your instructor. In this course, we start with creating and working with something known as a yoke. What is a yoke? By definition, a yoke is the upper part of a garment that fits the shoulder area if it's a top or a dress. However, a yoke can also be used on a skirt. One thing about yokes is that most of the time there is no shoulder seam. See that? There's no shoulder seam. It continues all the way to the back, all in one piece. I'm going to show you how to eliminate the shoulder seam. Here are some examples of yokes. I'm going to show you 2 techniques on how to create a yoke. First, I will drape a yoke for you, and then I will use pattern making to draft a yoke. Okay, so we'll need some muslin, we'll need scissors, and some pins. I've cut a piece of muslin about 8 inches by 8 inches, so it's a square. And here's the selvage. So the grain line of the fabric goes this way. And we're pinning it onto the dress form, onto center front. Now again, if all these words mean nothing to you, then you need to take my draping course so that you know what all these words mean. Grain line, selvage, bust line, and so on. Some students make the mistake of pinning your muslin like this and forgetting about the neckline in this neck area. So don't do this, okay? You need to start with 3 or 4 inches above the neckline and pin your muslin in the dress form like this, with the pin going in this direction. What I mean by that is if I put the pin in the opposite direction, watch what happens. Watch. If I put the pin going this way, what happens is the pin comes undone, the muslin comes off the form, and then you have to start all over again. So this is basic pinning. So pin your muslin onto the dress form in the correct way, this way, so it anchors the form. You see that? It's not going anywhere. All right, so I'm going to pin my center front, and now I'm going to take my scissors and from the neckline go up maybe 1 inch or so, and watch what happens. You have to cut in about 1 inch and then go upward. You're going to cut in this direction like this. See how my scissors going up this way, so that I can then take my scissors and cut downward onto the neckline, towards the neckline, like this, so that my muslin can fold nicely onto the dress form and create a smooth piece of muslin. Next, I'm going to mark my neckline. I'm going to use a Sharpie so you can see better, but you will use a sharp pencil. So I'm going to mark my neckline, and where my neckline meets my shoulder and my shoulder seam, and where my shoulder meets the armhole. Next, we're going to create the actual style line, the yoke style line, and this is really up to you to decide how big of a yoke you want. You could have a very narrow yoke or a very wide yoke. So it's really up to you as far as the length of it and also the shape of it. It could be a very simple straight across line, Or if you wanted a Western look, you know, you can shape it into one of the, you've seen those Western shirts that look like, kind of like that. But for this particular exercise, I'm just going to keep it straight across so that eventually when I take it off the form and make a pattern from it, I will end up with a yoke that looks like that. I'm doing the same thing for the back. I've cut a piece of muslin, pin my selvage, the grain line goes this way again, pin my center back, right? There's my neckline, my shoulder, the armhole, and then the back yoke style line. All right, at the beginning of this video, I was showing you a shirt, a white shirt, where the yoke went from the front onto the back without a shoulder seam, right? How are we gonna eliminate the shoulder seam? I'm gonna show you that in the next class. When you do that, the grain lines get really crazy. It gets really interesting. I'll see you next class. And welcome back. Let's continue with our yokes. I have removed the muslin from the form, and I've transferred all this information onto dotted paper. To cut to the chase, I've done this already. If you don't know how to do this, or you forgot, if you want to refresh your memory, in my pattern making and draping courses, it explains how to do that. So here's my front yoke. CF means center front. And I've done the same thing for the back. Here's my muslin, there's my dotted paper. Now, how do we eliminate that shoulder seam? I'm going to show you two quick ways. One is to take my front shoulder seam and place it on top of the back. Now, here's the mistake that some students make at first. Some students will place it like that. Now watch, this is important. This is your shoulder seam right here for the back, and this is the shoulder seam for the front. You want to put shoulder seam on top of shoulder seam. Very important. In other words, it looks like that. They overlap each other. Another simpler way is to take the seam allowance of the front yoke, fold the seam allowance under, and place it on top of the back, like that. And then use a little bit of Scotch tape, and we're going to tape the two seams together like so. Okay, there you go. So we have now eliminated the shoulder seam. In other words, pretend that this seam was never there. This is now one piece, and there you have it. If this was a solid color, in other words, it was all white, all black, or all red, or pink, yellow, green, whatever, it was one color, you're pretty much done. But what if the fabric had a certain pattern? For example, stripes. Here's a striped dress, and here's our back yoke. Notice that the yoke from the back continues onto the front. Now, your shoulder line is somewhere here, and the yoke line is past the shoulder onto the front section. For the purpose of this exercise, I've taken my dotted paper and I've drawn some lines like stripes, like a fabric that has stripes, and you can see that the yoke starts from the back, goes onto the front. This is all one piece, and the stripes end up looking like that, which is fine, nothing wrong with that. It's one way to handle a design like this. Another possibility is to put the stripes horizontally in the front, and again, no side, no shoulder seam, one continuous piece. Look what happens to the back yoke and the stripes. So that's another option. Well, what if you didn't like any of those options? You say, well, I want this back yoke, the stripes, to go in this direction, and I want the front yoke, the stripes, to go in this direction. That's okay, you can do that. In this case though, you do need a shoulder seam because the stripes are going in all different directions, you see. I'm showing you different options because when you're dealing with a yoke and stripes, you have options. You can get really creative with it, so have fun with it. Not to mention that you can have the yoke in one color and the rest of the body in a different color, which I will show you as we move along with the rest of this course. But before we get to work on the rest of the body, in the next class I'm going to show you how to use pattern drafting or pattern making, and how to draft yokes, and how to use a 1-dart bodice or a 2-dart bodice to create a yoke. What do you do with those darts, and so on. So it's only going to get more exciting. Stay tuned. See you in class. We're going to work with yokes by using pattern making or pattern drafting techniques. We'll use the 1-dart bodice, the 2-dart bodice. We'll work with gathers, notches, and so on. So let's get to it. We start by making a copy of this 1-dart bodice. So we trace our pattern onto dotted paper all the way around. And there you have it. Next, it's really a matter of figuring out the style line. We'll do something a little interesting. And I'm going to use my French curve to help me shape this yoke. And we'll do something like this. Next, we're going to cut the pattern out. We've cut the pattern out, and now we're going to separate the yoke from the rest of the body. And that's pretty much it. Now, this pattern, this bodice, has no seam allowance. So when you cut this in the fabric, make sure that you add all the proper seam allowance, otherwise it'll never work. So add seam allowance before you cut it and sew it. Working with a 2-dart bodice, it's a little more tricky. We start by, again, tracing your pattern onto dotted paper. So we have a dotted paper draft to work with. I'm going to start by folding and closing my shoulder dart. I'm going to fold, crease and fold one leg of the dart and fold it over to the other one. And I'm going to pin it closed like this. Pinned my dart closed. Now I create the style line, the yoke style line, and I'm going to use my ruler and a pencil and just draw my yoke style line like that. Now I'm going to add 2 notches, and about 1 inch or so. I'm going to put a notch right here. And same thing, about 1 inch, 1.5 inches or so. I'm going to put a notch right here. See, because now we're going to separate the yoke from the body, like so. We're going to Scotch tape this dart closed, so this becomes one piece yoke. And once we remove this pin or pins, we have this extra material to deal with. Notches serve primarily 2 purposes. One is to indicate seam allowance. The other purpose is to help the seamstress or the factory put this piece or these pieces back together. See, now I'm going to take this amount right here from this notch to this notch, and I'm going to create gathers. or shirring. Meaning that when I put this back together, this will be gathered to fit this yoke. So it tells the seamstress that as you start sewing from here, you have to match this notch, continue sewing, and match this notch, and so on. So all this extra fabric will become gathers or shirring to be gathered to fit these two notches up here. The thing with yokes is that almost always yokes are cut doubled, which means there's actually two yokes. There is the outside yoke, of course, but there's also an inside yoke. You see, these yokes are cut double. There's two yokes. There's the outside yoke and the inside yoke. And the beauty of that is that all the seam allowance of the shirt, dress, whatever, is sandwiched between the two yokes. So you have no seam allowance showing. It's all nice and clean on the inside. Okay, so we've been dealing with yokes and variations of yokes and so on. What about the rest of the body? Next class, we want to show you how to take that pattern and slash and spread it, add some really cool style lines, and create some exciting designs with it. So stay tuned. See you next class. So if this video resonated with you, I encourage you to enroll in the full course. I'll put the link in the description below, and I will see you in class.